Hello, good evening, everyone. I hope all of you are doing well. Welcome to the News Today edition of 28th of June, wherein we try to cover all important news of the day in the most simplest format for you guys to understand. So let's look at the quick news for the day. Firstly, there has been a report on agricultural and allied sectors output, followed by India has recently rejected the Court of Arbitration Supplemental Award, followed by India's external debt has risen. Then there has been Skills for the Future report, followed by India's startup ecosystem news. And then again, very quickly, we'll cover all the news in shorts. So let's start with the first news, wherein there has been a report which has been released by the National Statistical Office, which talks about the value of output in agriculture and allied sectors has increased. So firstly, my question to you, what comes to your mind when you think about Indian economy? A software company or a farmer working in the field? Trust me, literally and economically, agriculture has been contributing a lot to Indian economy. And this is where this NSO report has been highlighting that how agricultural output had not just increased by its value, but also by its output, right? So if we talk about gross value addition, again, which is measured at the current prices, it has increased by 225%. And the gross value of output, it has increased by 54.6%. So all of you know, we have read in economics, what do you understand by gross value added? It is basically meaning how much money agriculture is adding to the economy as per the today's current prices. Then again, it is not because in economy, inflation is also happening. So again, the other picture is been given by gross value of output. How much in actual output has increased since the last 10 years, which measures the actual production of volume adjusted for inflation, right? So this picture is telling that how agriculture in terms of economic contribution has been contributing, and its value as well as its output has increased. So let's see what all things have been highlighted in this particular report. Number one, crop sector, right? So again, crop sector is the largest contributor in terms of value of output. It is amounting to 54.1%. Then in terms of top cereal producing states, Uttar Pradesh has been ranked 1, followed by, out of all the cereals, again, we have different variety of cereals, but again, this report has told 85% of the cereals come only from paddy and wheat. Followed by, again, this is where there has been a new trend which has been showcasing that, again, agriculture has diversified itself a lot. We have moved from traditional crop-based agriculture to horticulture, condiments and spices, then again fishing and aquaculture, which this report tells that how horticulture has doubled its gross value output by the last 10 years, followed by, in terms of condiments and spices, the top 3 states are Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka and Gujarat. And in terms of fishing and aquaculture, the contribution has increased from 4.2% to 7%. And in fact, this is a new thing. And I'll ask you one question here. Share of marine fishes has increased than inland fishes now. What do you think? What is the reason? Tell me in comments that again, why do you think that the share of marine fishes has increased? A hint that government is working towards cold storage and in terms of better exports of fishes. There are a few schemes of that as well, right? So these facts are very important, where again, prelims related questions or maybe one point of options could be put up from this particular content. So again, this is where certain factual aspects from current affairs is there, which is important from prelims point of view. Next, we talk about what are the importance of agricultural and allied sectors. We have seen that agriculture has been employing approximately half of the population, which is somewhere around 46.1%. But still, it is only contributing 16% to the Indian GDP. Why is it so? agricultural sector has been facing a lot of challenges. This report has highlighted that although in terms of value addition, in terms of actual value of output, the agricultural sector has improved, but it is still, again, one more side is being presented, and again, agriculture, which is employing approximately half of the population, is only contributing 16% to the GDP. And the challenge is, of course, well known to all of us, for example, followed by low productivity per land in terms of low farmer income, water overuse, climate change, extreme weather. So these are few important factors which are challenges when it comes to productivity in the agricultural economy. So this was a major thing which has been highlighted by NSO in this particular report. And again, this report is, it is a which organization, that is also very important for prelims point of view. Now, in generally, let's say if I ask you a question that again, if you are having a farm. In a farm, what all things you need? You are growing some crops, you are having some, you are also maybe doing fishing activity, a lot of other allied activities. In a similar manner, just like a farm, in Indian agricultural economy, government has been putting out schemes for diversified sector of agriculture in terms of fishes, in terms of horticulture, in terms of floriculture, in terms of agriculture. Let's discuss a few of these schemes. Now, the first scheme is Agricultural Infrastructure Fund, for where what has been done, 1 lakh crore fund has been launched. Basically, it is contributing to post-harvest infrastructure of India. Usually what happens, the major problem of India is in terms of post-harvest storage. So there are storage facilities which are being developed, right? And this would help down farmers to store the amount of produce and again sell at the right time when they want. And again, it is going to make more informed choice, or again, it is going to give a lot of informed choice in terms of selling the products to the farmers. Then in terms of Digital Agricultural Mission. All of you know that, again, there's a specific topic in our syllabus of GS Paper 3, e-technology in the aid of farmers. So Digital Agricultural Mission is basically integrating the use of technology in the farming activities. In terms of, there are a lot of things in terms of use of AI, use of GIS, right? All of these are helping down and again coming under the idea of Digital Agricultural Mission, where again the use of AI, drones, satellite mapping, mobile apps have been used, wherein it would help farmers to take real-time decisions for the farmers. And it is also helping in terms of supporting farmers, supporting startups, in terms of precision farming initiatives. Then, in terms of Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, as I talked about, the Indian agriculture has been diversifying. So this particular scheme is targeting the fisheries and aquacultural development, wherein support has been given to the sector in terms of infrastructure development, cold chain development, providing them with boats, right? The aim is of this particular scheme is to improve the fish production of India in terms of export, and also this sector is going to develop or generate employment, right? So again, it is basically aiming to formalize and modernize the fishing sector of Indian economy. Lastly, there is Mission for Integrated Development of Horticulture, MIDH scheme. Again, integrated development. So starting from what we call as, which is going to be a holistic development of the horticulture sector, starting from the agriculture till the marketing of the product, entire thing is being covered in this particular scheme, which is again a sponsored, centrally sponsored scheme for holistic horticultural growth. It is covering fruits, vegetables, spices, flowers, and plantation crops. It is supporting production, post-harvest infrastructure, and market access, right? So it is again promoting the idea of crop diversification and high-value farming, because the value of these kind of products in Indian as well as international market has been on an increasing trend. So that's all about this particular report. Moving on to the next news. Very important. I'll explain this news to you in a very quick story format. So listen it in very carefully. India has recently rejected the Court of Arbitration Award upon the Indus Water Treaty, right? This topic was in news. after this whole attack at the Pahalgam by the terrorists, right? So these are the few points. India has rejected the supplementary award, which has been issued by Court of Arbitration, headquartered in Hague. Then again, the Court of Arbitration has ruled that it had the authority to decide on Kishanganga and Ratel hydro projects, right? And India has called the court's formation a violation of Indus Water Treaty and has declared the treaty in abeyance. Let's understand firstly what exactly is Indus Water Treaty. So India signed this treaty in the year 1960. It is a bilateral treaty. Bilateral means between two countries, India and Pakistan, on the sharing of Indus River, right? And it was brokered by World Bank, right? So in terms of allocation of rivers, of all the tributaries of Indus, the Satluj, Beas, and Ravi was given to India. All the water use will be done by India. In terms of the western flowing rivers, Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, it was given to Pakistan, right? So, however, is one more important fact. India can use western rivers for specific non-consumptive purposes. This line is very important to understand this current scenario. What, sir, I mean by non-consumptive purposes? So again, India can use the western rivers which the Pakistan has got in terms of Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab for what we call as non-consumptive purposes. Have a very brief look on the map of this whole Indus River, which where western rivers and eastern rivers, where again the dams are being located. That is very important for your place in news aspect. Followed by, what exactly are non-consumptive uses? So again, non-consumptive uses basically that any kind of use of those western rivers which is not reducing the volume of water which Pakistan is receiving. Okay? So it is allowing, what does it mean? It allows India under the Indus Water Treaty to use the western flowing rivers of Indus, Chenab, and Jhelum for hydroelectric power generation, navigation, fisheries, and flood control. Because these are called as non-consumptive uses. Because on this usage, it will not reduce the volume of water which is going to reach Pakistan. Clear? Then, sir, why this whole idea of hydroelectric power consumption is in news? So, hydroelectric में से क्या होता है? How does water or how does electricity is generated through hydroelectric power plants? So it is using the flow of water. The flow of water is used to run the turbines, and water is not diverted for agricultural or drinking purposes. We are just only using the water to run those turbines. Water is passed through those turbines, and again it is again flowing to the same area where again it is naturally supposed to flow, right? So it is returned to the river after the generation of electricity. So again, we are not consuming such water. So again, it is coming under the non-consumptive purposes which is allowed in the Indus Water Treaty. So sir, problem kahan se aaya? The treaty allows run of the river projects. Again, the two projects which we are going to discuss, that again, what are the features of run of the river projects? Minimum storage, low storage only, no large dams or no major diversions would be there. And water flows through turbines and is returned to the downstream, right? So examples are Kishanganga project in Jhelum and Ratel project in Chenab. So again, it is by the law itself under the Indus Water Treaty, India is allowed to maybe construct these hydroelectric projects. The problem aaya kaha? So India, again, for there are four guidelines which has been issued that even if you are using the water for non-consumptive process, you need to maybe check on these four parameters. That again, the water which you are using is not limiting on dam height and storage capacity. There is restrictions on tunnel dimensions and outlet. They must share project design with Pakistan in advance and follow timelines for notification and approval. Four important, what we call as guidelines to be followed for using water for non-consumptive purposes. Now, what is the Pakistan's concern? Pakistan stand is that the projects India you are constructing is affecting the flow of the water to Pakistan. But we have seen, sir, we are just only using it to run the turbine. We are not using that water for drinking or irrigation purpose. Then only India might be crossing the technical limits, which I have discussed here. So India has told we have not breached these technical limits at all, right? So India's stand is we are fully compliant with the treaty. The projects are within the permitted non-conjunctive scope. Then what is the problem? So if in a treaty, if there are two parties involved, there would be a time where again there would be some kind of dispute between the two parties. So in this Indus Water Treaty, if there is a dispute, there are three mechanisms which has been developed to solve that dispute. The first one is through the Permanent Indus Commission, which has to be constituted under the Indus Water Treaty. Then if it is not solved here, then there is a neutral expert to deal with unresolved differences on water sharing. If it is not there, we can go to Court of Arbitration, which is again a 7-member arbitral tribunal to deal with the disputes. So again, this is the mechanism for dispute resolution with respect to Indus Water Treaty. Now what has happened? So dispute resolution methods, India is preferring the neutral expert dispute resolution platform. Pakistan is preferring Court of Arbitration. Why? There is a difference between these two. India is preferring this. Why? Because the neutral expert is interpreting the Indus Water Treaty in its actual spirit. That is, what was the reason of this treaty at all? Right? So whenever there is a dispute, it is going to resolve that dispute keeping in mind the spirit behind which this Indus Water Treaty was there. So again, which is going to be a flexible and it is going to see technicalities with respect to the dispute. But Pakistan is preferring Permanent Court of Arbitration. And it is because this Permanent Court of Arbitration is going by the text of the treaty. It is interpretation in letter, right? And the decisions of Permanent Court of Arbitration is binding on the both parties. It is legal and binding. That is the issue. And it is one more thing, कि at the very same time, you cannot go for two dispute resolutions parallelly. That is one more issue why India has called this award as illegal in nature. Let's see. Again, few timeline. In 2015, Pakistan raises objections. पहले कहाँ गया? To the neutral expert, right? In 2016, it withdraw it from the neutral expert and transferred its dispute to the Court of Arbitration, right? India at that point of time told, India at the very same time filed for a neutral expert under the Indus Water Treaty. India ne file kiya under the neutral one. Pakistan filed the dispute under the Court of Arbitration. So for the very same issue, two dispute resolutions are running parallelly. ठीक है? In 2022, World Bank controversially appoints both COA and neutral expert, which is not illegal according to the treaty. At the very same time, two dispute resolution mechanisms could not be run, but World Bank did that. In 2025, recently the award has a supplementary award has been awarded by the Court of Arbitration. India का stand है, India is telling कि sir, this ruling has said India's suspension of Indus Water Treaty does not affect the COA's authority. India has rejected this award. Why? After this whole Pahalgam terrorist attack, India told we are not going to follow Indus Water Treaty of 1960. Sir, अगर हम treaty follow ही नहीं कर रहे हैं, why we'll get that award? Why we are going to maybe oblige to the decisions which are been given by the Court of Arbitration? That is what the India has told while rejecting this supplementary award by Court of Arbitration, right? So again, India has also told that this COA is illegally constituted. Two mechanisms of dispute cannot be run at the very same time. There is a violation of Indus Water Treaty dispute resolution mechanism. India exercising sovereign rights under international law. India is completely sovereign country, so again, it has a completely right to reject any kind of a treaty. Then the treaty is placed in abeyance. India ने बोला कि sir, after this Pahalgam attack, we have told कि we are not following Indus Water Treaty, right? So there is a pending end to cross-border terrorism. So again, this is where India, that is the reason why India has not accepted or rejected, in fact, the supplementary award which has been awarded by Court of Arbitration towards the Indus Water Treaty. I hope you are clear on this. The next news. Recently, Reserve Bank of India has released a report which is talking about India's external debt has been on a rising trend. Right. So again, there are a few datas which is important again from prelims point of view, right? Where again the external debt has been approximately 736.3 billion US dollars, right? It has increased approximately by 67.5 billion dollars over the last year, right? And it excludes valuation effect due to the USD INR exchange rates. I'll discuss all of those. Firstly, what does the report says? Okay. Report says that India's external debt has increased by 67.75 billions from 2024 to 2025. What is external debt? In Indian economy, there are many times where again we are taking loans from international market, international organizations, and some foreign countries. The loans could be both taken by the government or by the private entities within the country. Okay? Then in terms of the debt to GDP ratio, I'll discuss all of these again. What is debt to GDP ratio? I'll discuss. It has again increased from 18.5% to 19.1%. In terms of long-term debt, what are long-term debts? Which needs to be repaid not in a very short span of time, but again, it is a long-term debt, right? Which has slightly increased. The short-term debt has slightly decreased. And the debt service, which is marginal decline by 0.1%. I'll discuss one by one all of these terms with you. Firstly, what do we understand by external debt? External debt is basically the money which has been borrowed by a country through foreign sources, right? For example, money could be borrowed by the Indian government, Indian banks, and international institutions, right? It includes both public as well as private companies borrowing. And again, borrowing are from, there are some example sources, example IMF, World Bank, foreign commercial banks, and other countries. Then what do we understand by debt to GDP ratio? Right? So debt to GDP ratio is total debt divided by the GDP of the country into 100. Why I have showcased this formula to you? This year in prelims examination, there was a question on maybe to calculate the fiscal deficit, primary deficit. Right? And this is where now, again, with the changing pattern of examination, there could be possible that they give you the total debt, they give the GDP and ask you to calculate the debt to GDP ratio. So again, whenever reading economics, again, look at the formulas, have that in mind, because you need to adapt yourself with the changing nature of questions which has been asked by UPSC in the examination, right? So moving forward, what exactly is the debt to GDP ratio? Okay? So the total debt, what India has, and with respect to total GDP of the country. Let's take an example. If let's say the total GDP of your country is 10,000 rupees, and if you have a debt of 2,000 rupees, so the debt to GDP ratio will be 1. Let's say if your debt has increased from 2,000 to 5,000, and your GDP remains the same. So these are the two scenarios which I am going to discuss. So it is the debt to GDP ratio tells whether a country is borrowing too much or too less. If it is a lower ratio, it means debt is on a manageable state. But if there is a higher debt to GDP ratio, it means there is more pressure to repay. Your income is less, but you're borrowing more. So of course, it is going to strain your purse. In a similar manner, it is going to strain the economy. That is a broad idea of debt to GDP ratio. Moving forward, what is debt composition and what is our external debt made of? So basically, this is where the report has highlighted few things, that out of all the debt, US dollar is comprising of 54.2%, which is telling that majority of the debt which India has is of US dollars. Indian rupee, in terms of domestic currency, we have a debt of 31.1%. And in terms of Japanese yen and the special drawing rights under IMF, there are smaller shares. This is in terms of currency, in terms of borrower, and in terms of instruments. So, sir, what do we mean by external debt from the perspective of borrower and by the instrument? By borrower means, in India, as I discussed earlier also, debt is taken by government also, debt is taken by private parties also. So who is the borrower, right? That this report has also highlighted. The non-financial corporations, that is basically the private sectors, have a debt of 35.5%. The deposit-taking corporation, banks in India, has 27.5% of a debt. The government has approximately 22.9% of the debt, right? In terms of instruments, अब लोन लेने के बहुत सारे तरीके होते हैं. There are different mechanisms through which we take loans, right? So majority of the loans, according to this report, has been taken, the debt is in the form of a loan, which is approximately 34%. In terms of currency, in terms of deposits, it is comprising of the next major portion of the external debt. So these are the few stats which has been published in this particular report by the RBI. Very important. Maybe they could ask you in the form of one option in the prelims examination. Or you can quote many of these in terms of your GS paper 3 answers, in terms of substantiating a point what you are mentioning down in your answers. The idea, of course, here is we are reading current affairs to prepare and to qualify the examination. So we should understand that whenever I'm reading current affairs, how I can use that current affairs to solve questions of prelims, and how I'm going to use current affairs in my mains answer writing. That is a skill which we need to learn. Then in terms, this report is also talking about valuation effect. Again, in the initial part of the report, it has been told that the valuation effect has been excluded in this report. But in the international market, or in the in the currency exchange, how are the rates determined is completely market driven, and it is basically very volatile in nature, right? So in fact, if you see, it refers to a change of debt value due to currency fluctuation. Sir, what is currency fluctuation? It means if rupee is weakening with respect to dollars, the external debt is going to appear larger, right? And if current increase is the current increase which has been highlighted by RBI in this particular report is excluding this effect. कि sir fluctuation को हमने incorporate किया ही नहीं है इस report में, right? So now technically, basically it means if the US dollar becomes stronger in a future, right, and the rupee is weakening, even if we don't borrow more, the value of our external debt in terms of rupee is going to increase. Okay? Then what do you understand by is rising external debt a concern for Indian economy, right? So what are some positives? Because debt service has declined. What do we understand by debt service? I'll take you just one here. Debt service basically means India, इस report में यह आया कि India's debt service has declined. I'll explain it to you through an example. Let's say in this 2024 year, you have a debt of maybe 1 lakh rupees and you're paying a monthly EMI of, assume it is 1,000 rupees, because you have borrowed 1 lakh rupees at some rate of an interest. In 2025, you have increased your borrowing from 1 lakh to 1,20,000. But, sir, the monthly EMI which you are paying is approximately 990 rupees. You have borrowed more, but you are paying less. Why? Because maybe the rate of interest might have reduced. And this is where this report tells that India has performed slightly well in terms of debt service. The amount of actual loan or the interest what we are paying back or the EMIs which are paying back every year, it has slightly decreased in spite of the fact the external debt has increased. That is what this report has highlighted. India's total external debt has increased, but the amount India paid in that year to repay the interest plus principal went down slightly by 0.1%. ज़्यादा नहीं है, 0.1% से decrease किया है. This is basically called as debt service, right? Although the debt has grown, but the burden of repayments was slightly less. Very important. They can ask you maybe a question prelims. They can ask you what is debt service and 4 options. Again, you have understood that concept as well. This report has also told the long-term debt is dominating. Long-term debt hai, so again, it is going to have a less rollover risk, which we basically understand. What are the concerns with respect to India's rising external debt? It means there is more pressure for the government to pay back and more pressure due to the fluctuating exchange rates. If rupee is going to weaken, right, what would happen? We are going to, for the same amount of debt, we are going to pay more. Then the high US dollar debt exposes India to currency risk, and if exports slow down, because if India is increasing export, we are earning more dollars. If we're earning more dollars, what would happen? It will be easy for us to pay back that dollar loan, right? It was told that it is also being telling that if export is slowing down, it is going, the repaying debt will become a much harder and a costlier mechanism, right? So this is what has been told in this particular report. So now the point here is what are the concerns with this, right? So there is a repayment burden due to exchange rate fluctuations, which I have discussed. Okay, if let's say rupee is weakening, dollar is becoming more stronger, it is going to make the task of this payment of the external debt slightly harder on the government. Rising inflation and interest rates. In fact, if you see, inflation has been on a slighter, maybe rising trend in the last couple of 3-4 years, right? With interest rates, what does RBI does? It tightens the monetary policy. Interest rates is going to rise. The money is going to become more dearer. In fact, if money is going to become more dearer, the loans payment is also going to become harder, right? Then what is crowding out of productive investment? Government, if it is focusing, if it has large number of external debt, so it is paying more, or maybe the majority of government funds is spent on paying back the external debt which the country has, and on productive sectors of economy like education, skill development, government has no money left to spend on that. It is basically talking about the crowding out of productive investment. Lastly, balance of payment pressure. Right? So again, the amount of money what you are earning and the amount of money what you are spending, this is basically called as balance of payment. If external debt is rising, right, it is going to stress the balance of payment of India. Right? This is what this report has basically talked about. Coming to the next news of the day, there has been a recent report which is talking about skills for the future, transforming India's workforce landscape, right? Again, this report has been released by Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, right? And this report is focusing on aligning India's workforce with 21st century job needs. A problem kya hai economy ki? And that is problem in the job market. People have skills, and it is not matching with the kind of a job which is there in the economy, right? This is where this report is highlighting that again, how mismatch of demand with respect to the requirement of job is there and how we can overcome that. Firstly, sir, what is the problem? What has this report talked about? इन्होंने बोला है, sir, 88% of the jobs in India are less competent. Example, delivery, data entry, manual labors. So 88% are the low competent jobs which is there in the economy. Then skill mismatch. People have different kind of skills, but they are doing different kind of jobs. Clear? There are overqualified, certain times there is, which is using to what? Underused talent. Sometimes people are overqualified for a job, which is leading to what we call as, or underqualified job, which is leading to what we call as poor performance in the job market. This report has also told what are the structural issues which is leading to this. Number one, the lack of high skills job, and number two, poor access to training in the rural and low income groups. In fact, if you understand this, one more report which has been telling that again, India by 2047 is going to reap the benefit of demographic dividend what it is has as of now. If we are not going to skill those workforce now, we are not going to take the advantage of the population which India has once it is going to reach 2047. And that is where skill development has been a major concern and a major area of focus of the government. Then we talk about why does it matter? Because if you see what, again, a very humorous line, skill mismatch is like putting an IIT graduate into manage a photocopy shop. Skilled for something different, doing some dismeaningful job. Not, again, dismeaningful is not the right word, but again, skill mismatch, right? Then, effects of skill mismatch, what would happen? Productivity will be low because you are wasting talent in the wrong jobs. There is widening inequality. Of course, the rich are getting trained and poor are not getting trained. There is migration and brain drain. If skilled jobs is not there in the economy, then again people will be migrating for better job opportunities, which is again going by the idea of brain drain in the economy. Lost demographic dividend. That is what I have discussed. Then, in terms of what can be done. What can be done? Number one, you need to revamp that technical education. Sir, skill courses and job relevant courses should be there in terms of the education system. Number one. Number two, skill demand mapping. What skill a person has and what kind of skill is required in the job market. With the growing influence of artificial intelligence, robotics, people should be trained on that front. Right? Because in the recent times, there has been a debate. AI is going to take up jobs. No, sir. Compare it with the history. Industrial revolution also happened. For the very short span of time, there was a job losses. Why? Because people were not skilled enough to run the machines after the industrial revolution. But once people got skilled enough to run those machines, it led to job creation. This is a similar effect which has been there in the Indian economy now. Temporarily, people are not skilled enough to run those AI. But once people are skilled enough, this AI or automation or robotics, it is going to create more such jobs. Clear? Then industry engagement. What is industry engagement? We should encourage the companies to hire from the skill pool which the government is going to create. Lastly, we are going to promote lifelong learning. Sir, whenever there is a new update on your phone, you update it. Why? Because this is where the phone is going to function more efficiently. In a similar manner, if people are working, they need to be trained, they need to be adapting to the changing natures of the job market. This is where lifelong learning is going to be promoted in order to enhance the skill which is actually demanded in the job market. Right? These are a few things. Now moving on to the next topic. Recently, Meta has released a report which is talking about India's startup ecosystem has seen an exponential growth over the last decade. So startups, talking about you order food from Zomato, you book an Ola cab ride, right? You use Paytm for payments. You use Zerodha for, let's say, investment and all of things, right? So once these were small companies, but now they have become unicorns, right? This is where the Meta has told or released a report that how India's startup ecosystem has been on a booming side, right? Few data has been told. India is ranking third globally in the startup ecosystem. Again, in terms of Hurun Unicorn Index report of 2025. Then in terms of 150,000 plus recognized startups is there according to DPIIT. Then in terms of 51% of the startups are there in non-metro cities, which is a major indication of how development is moving from tier 1 to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And unicorns has been valuing approximately $380+ billion. These are the few things which has been highlighted in this particular report. You can use these data in maybe conclusions, introductions, or points of your answer, where again there is a question on Startup India scheme. So basically, this scheme of Startup India, again, this is where to harness and why this Startup India has boomed. The report is telling now that we have boomed the startup sector. Why? Because our government has come up with the Startup India scheme, which is being launched by Ministry of Commerce under the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, right? So a startup is basically what? It is a new age company with innovative ideas, usually a tech-driven and having a high growth potential, right? So how they are registering themselves, how are startups getting registered? In 3 ways. Once they are registered as private limited companies or under limited liability partnership or partnership. Again, what is the criteria? They need to have a turnover under 100 crore rupees and they should be not older than 10 years. So these are the basic criteria to register a startup under the Companies Act of 2013. Very important, sir, for your prelims examination. Next, what again this report has highlighted that what has drove India's startup ecosystem, and on what are the reasons that why this ecosystem has boomed a lot. Number one, the digital penetration. The digital penetration has been given one factor why this startup ecosystem has boomed. Example, cheaper internet. Of course, you're experiencing this in the economy. Smartphone access has increased in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. In fact, earlier, 10 years back, if you see, there was less penetration of these apps, Ola, Uber, Ola, Zomato, and all of those Indian startups. But now, people, they have maybe inculcated them into the tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well. This is due to internet penetration or digital penetration. The second growth factor which has been highlighted by this particular report is the early stage funding, where again, all of you must have watched Shark Tank India, which is again a platform where again people are coming and again talking about or taking investments. But again, this is where the early stage funding process, which has maybe contributing one of the reasons in terms of booming of the startup sector. There is a surge in investor interest, venture capital availability. Then AI integration, where again the startups are tech integrated, right? 70% of startups use AI to cut the costs and boost their performance. Global expansion. The startups are not limiting themselves only to India, right? They have a global presence as well. Example is Oyo Homes. Oyo Homes, which was the initial Indian startup, has maybe diversified its market to European countries as well. Many startups targeting USA, UAE, on UK markets. Then omni-channel strategy. That is, it is combining not only one platform, multiple platforms, combining online ads, offline stores, all of those. You talk about Lenskart, again a startup. Tier 2 and tier 3 cities focus, because if you see, it is majority of population in these tier 2 and tier 3 cities are getting educated. Development has reached at certain level to them, and this is where startups is helping, where with terms of WhatsApp, regional influencers used to reach small towns, right? So again, this is all are the reasons or the growth factors which has been contributing to the upcoming or the boom of the startup sectors in India. Then, India's emerging power in startups. These are the reports which I have discussed already, right? And again, which has been highlighted in this particular report. And a unicorn, again, a concept of prelims. Again, which company are called as unicorn companies, which is a private startup which is valuing more than $1 billion. Now moving to also in news part, quick updates. Yesterday we had the Puri Jagannath Rath Yatra, which was there for 2025. It is an annual chariot festival, which is there in Puri, Odisha, where again it begins usually on the Asad Mas, which is a Hindi term, which is usually between June and July, and Lord Balbhadra, Jagannath and Subhadra are traveling from Jagannath temple to their aunt's place, that is Gundicha temple. And after 8 days on Buddha Yatra, they are going to return back to the Jagannath temple. Again, a very huge cultural significance of this particular festival. And this Puri Jagannath temple is among the 4 dhams which are there in India, which is there specifically in the eastern side, right? And also it is very important a part of your Indian culture in the history syllabus, right? You also going to read about what kind, and tell me in comments that what is the style of temple architecture which is used in this Jagannath temple. I would expect a comment on that. Followed by Adi Karam Yogi program. So this program has been launched by Ministry of Tribal Affairs. The tribal region are to be governed by, of course, the government servants. So first, as these people are going to govern the tribal people, they need to be trained in a manner so that they become sensitive, they become aware about the requirements, and they provide better governance services to those tribal people, right? So that is where training the trainers program is being launched under this Adi Karam Yogi program, which is going to build a dedicated cadre of officers for grassroots tribal transformation. How? They are focusing on capacity building of 20 lakh field level stakeholders. How? They are training the master trainers at state, district and block level. Goal is to reach 1 lakh tribal villages and habitations, followed by the approach is to promote citizen-centric governance and service delivery. The next news, current account balance. In fact, this quarter, India has shown a positive trend where again we have a surplus of $13.5 billion, which is approximately 1.3% of GDP, right? And which has led to a decline in fiscal deficit of the country by 0.6% of GDP, right? Where again, why this is a good step? Because usually we are always on a deficit, but again, this time we had a current account surplus, right? So basically what exactly is current account balance? It is tracking the flow of goods, services, income transfers between India and the world, basic economics, right? And it is a part of balance of payments, and major components of the current account comprise the goods, which is again a balance of import and export, followed by services, income, current transfers. So these are the major components of the current account balance. Next, the Vera C. Rubin Observatory is there in Chile. It was in news. I'll just tell you one thing. Have you ever used your smartphone to take a time lapse? Right? So this program or this observatory, which is located in Chile, is going to take a time lapse of the entire southern sky in the nighttime for the upcoming 10 years. This is what this observatory is all about. It is located in Chile. Its purpose is to conduct the legacy surveys of space and time, a 10-year project to map the southern sky, time lapses ke through. And again, what is going to see that what are the different galaxies, asteroids, right? This is where this particular observatory has been set up for the purpose, right? So again, recently it has released its first image of the cosmos, right? And it is named after Vera C. Rubin, a pioneering astronomer known for her work on dark matter. Very important. They can ask you, Vera C. Rubin Observatory was sometime back in news. It is related to what? Right? This is where the nature of questions are being asked in the examination. Next, there is one major thing, fluoroalkyl substances, which are basically called as PFAs. All of you must have seen non-stick pan. In the non-stick pan, what is making that whole non-stick pan in a greasy manner? The kind of a compound which is being used in that non-stick pan. And in fact, that compound is everlasting in the ecosystem. It is not degradable and a major environment pollutant. So recently a bacteria has been discovered which is going to decompose that substance. That is why this is in news. As simple as that, right? So what? It is a man-made chemicals with storage carbon fluorine bonds. Again, very basic. Properties, it is resisting the grease, water, heat. It is used in cookware, packing and paints. Again, this non-stick thing. Concern, they are not getting degraded easily, which is why they're called as forever chemicals. Would be a question in prelims examination, right? They pollute air, water, soil, they bioaccumulate in humans and animals, and recently 20 bacteria species has been found that can break down these PFAs. Very important. Next, there has been an IBAT alliance. So basically, in India, maybe across the world, if I have been given a task to conserve the ecosystem, I need to know about the forests, the animal, the plant species, what areas need to be conserved, what areas are already conserved. So this is an alliance of 4 bodies which are taking all the important data with respect to environmental conservation so that they can efficiently manage that. This is an alliance of these 4 bodies: BirdLife International, Conservation International, IUCN, and UNEP WCMC, right? It has been founded in 2008, which has been headquartered at United Kingdom. Very important fact for prelims examination. The mission is to provide a biodiversity data, tools, and guidance, because efficient management of environment requires a good data. This is where these 4 bodies have been collaborating to provide that data of those environmental factors, right? So again, why this was in news? Because the investment has been doubled, and on which parameters? In terms of World Database on Protected Areas, IUCN Red List, and Key Biodiversity Areas database. Next, we have a SPRI scheme. SPRI stands for Scheme to Promote Registration of Employees and Employers. Many times what we have seen in the Indian economy, that many employers have not registered their employees under the ESI Act, which is again a social benefit which has to be given to the employees. So government has told, again, sir, if you have not done so, please come voluntarily. We are not going to penalize you. And this scheme is again a platform which, again, it is a voluntary compliance and not penalties going to be given to the employers, even if they have not registered yet. And this is a voluntary program where, again, employers who have not registered themselves and their employees are going to register them with the government, right? So it is relaunched in 2025. Originally, it was there in 2016 also. It is a one-time window for voluntary registration under the ESI Act, right? Then in terms of jellyfish, right? So all of you must have seen very beautiful jellyfish. Again, so recently in Cochin backwaters, there has been a bloom of this jellyfish, right? So jellyfish are basically indicator species, which indicate something happening in the environment, right? So if jellyfish are found in certain area, it means there is a warm water temperatures, there is eutrophication in the water, which is talking about nutrient pollution, there is overfishing, loss of predators, and there is pollution in the water. So all of these factors if jellyfish is there, it means all of these factors are there in the water. That is why jellyfish are there. So again, that is why we also call it as indicative species, right? So basically, it is a marine animal, and it is a part of Cnidarian group, followed by it lives on a habitat of open oceans, brackish water, drift with currents, and it is 95% water body with stinging cells, which is called as nematode. Lastly, the Goldilocks economy, India's current situation. All of you must have seen or read of a story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. Goldilocks used to like porridge, neither too cold, neither too hot, are in ideal state. So again, this is where the ideal state of Indian economy has been, again, metaphorically used with respect to Goldilocks economy, which is India's current situation, where again, an ideal state wherein the economy is just right, not too cold, not too hot, not too cold, right? And what are the features? We have low unemployment, we have steady GDP growth, we have moderate inflation interest rates, and we have improved the corporate earnings, again, which is again favoring investors and overall economic stability. Now, in your respective screens, there would be questions will be popping up. So once you have read the News Today document, once you have listened to this discussion, it is very important that you now solve the questions. Because question solving is very important in order to check whether I have understood the news in a way in which UPSC asks questions in the prelims examination. So please attempt those tests and check how well you have understood this particular topic. Vision IAS has also come up with a digital current affairs platform. Again, this is a one-stop solution for entire problem which student faces with respect to current affairs. Go and explore this platform of Vision IAS, right, which is a one-stop solution for all the current affairs issue which student faces with respect to this examination. So till the next time, thank you so much. All the very best.